When we think of an entire town being wiped off the face of the earth, most of us think of fictional disasters like the destruction of Bikini Bottom or the non-existent city of Atlantis. But the truth is, there are places that have been completely removed from our collective consciousness. But where do these false memories come from? Were they all made up by overactive imaginations? Or are there more sinister forces at play? In this episode, we'll be looking into some of these strange cases. So buckle up, because we're about to take you down a rabbit hole you won't forget. Entire cities that were once thriving, communities of families, schools and businesses, just gone. She started talking to herself, which freaked out the young boy. Sometimes she would walk around the house, humming a tune that Daniel had never heard before. He discovered that he had a twin brother named James, and that his parents had named him after a relative. Eventually, he came to accept his fate and moved on with his life. He became a successful businessman, married, and had children of his own. But what if someone's entire life story isn't their own? What if it belongs to someone else entirely? But throughout his life, Daniel often wondered what had happened to his real parents and why his mother had treated him so poorly. She explained that she had recently moved to South Carolina with her husband and 2 children. They had bought a large Victorian home for a reasonable price. At first, everything seemed fine. She says that she can feel her presence watching over her all the time. Whether or not anyone else believes her is irrelevant. For Helen, the truth is that Gertrude's spirit will never allow her to forget the tragedy of her past. It was home to a population of around 500 people and had all the amenities one would expect in a typical American community: a post office, a schoolhouse, a general store. The CIA set up brothels across the country where unsuspecting men were lured and drugged before being interrogated, but they turned a blind eye to the suffering of others. Thanks for tuning in. Why? Because they weren't really there. Silent Town never existed. The town was actually a secret CIA black site used for torture and prostitution. The people who lived there weren't real. They were actors hired by the CIA to make the black site look like a normal town. Any records of Silent Town's existence were destroyed so that the CIA could continue its operations undetected. Silent Town was one of the towns where these brothels were located. The men who were tortured in Silent Town were typically political dissidents or suspected. They would be brought to the brothel under false pretenses and then forced to watch as their wives prostituted themselves. If they resisted, they would be beaten and injected with drugs. But behind the facade of normalcy, Silent Town was hiding something sinister. But one day, while cleaning out an attic, Helen found a hidden compartment containing old newspapers, love letters, photographs, and a diary. As she began going through the items, she realized that they all belonged to a woman named Gertrude. She had lived in the house over 100 years ago and died there in 1918. Helen had never seen any records of Gertrude's existence. It was as if she had never lived at all. Then she would stop suddenly, as if someone had just shouted at her, and start dusting furniture or making dinner. She spent hours poring over old city directories and census records trying to find any mention of her name, but she came up empty. Meanwhile, strange things began happening around the house. Objects would go missing only to be found in the same spot the next day. Sometimes Helen would swear she heard Gertrude's voice calling out to her from the attic. Helen became convinced that Gertrude was trying to tell her something important. Determined to uncover the truth, Helen turned to Bethel for help. One night, Daniel's mother stopped mid-sentence while she was talking to her son. Then suddenly, the spirit box began speaking to him, saying, "It's not her house, it's mine. You need to leave." Startled by the sudden message, Helen and Bethel decided to hold a seance. They gathered in the attic with other paranormal investigators and began asking questions. "Why are you here?" asked one of the investigators. "Why are you haunting me?" a voice whispered. "I never left." Terrified, Helen and the other investigators ran from the attic and never looked back. Her story went viral, and thousands of women came forward, claiming to have experienced something similar. However, the media quickly dismissed these claims as mass hysteria. She looked at him for a moment before saying, "Who are you?" Daniel responded with a confused, "I'm your son," to which she replied, "You're not my son, you were adopted." Daniel protested, insisting that his mother was mistaken. But the next morning, Daniel woke up in a different bed, and his mother was nowhere to be found. We've got plenty more episodes just like this one coming your way. Also, stick around until the end, because we've got a special treat for you in the final story. They're called Manchurians. A Manchurian is someone whose memories of their childhood have been altered or repressed due to brainwashing. torture, or psychological abuse. The term comes from the CIA's top-secret MKUltra project, which took place during the Cold War era. The project involved experiments on mind control, and Manchurians were created by subjecting unsuspecting victims to intense psychological torture. When the victim was eventually released, they would have no memory of the abuse they had suffered. This process became known as Manchurian Candidate syndrome, and when you hear about them, you may wonder if you really should be wondering in the first place. There are many reports of people insisting that their hometown was real, only to find out it was UNT. But before we jump into it, be sure to hit that subscribe button. Daniel Freeman was born in 1943 and grew up in a small village in England with his mother, father, and younger sister. His father owned a local store in the town where he worked as a clerk alongside his son. According to Daniel, the village consisted of roughly 200 homes, each with their own garden and front yard. There was also a butcher shop, a pub, a bowling alley, and a church. Life was simple and peaceful. That was until World War II broke out and Daniel's life was turned upside down. One day, Daniel's father came home from work and announced that he had enlisted in the war effort. He hugged his family goodbye, promising to return home as soon as he could. Soon after, Daniel's mother received a letter from her husband informing her that he had made it to mainland Europe. A few days later, another letter arrived. It read, "I'm so sorry, but I have bad news. Your husband has been killed in action." Heartbroken, Daniel's mother threw herself onto her bed crying. Daniel didn't understand why his dad would leave them and never return. He couldn't comprehend death. All he knew was that his father had left them, and now no one could tell him when or if he'd come back. A few months later, Daniel's mother began acting strangely. As time went on, Daniel learned more about his past. Daniel's case isn't unique. There are other people who have shared similar experiences. In fact, there's even a name for people like Daniel. In 1979, a woman named Margaret Casey published an article in Reader's Digest about her experience as a Manchurian. As you can see, there are many reasons why someone might forget parts of their childhood. In 2012, a woman known only as Helen contacted paranormal investigator Brian Bethel. Helen became obsessed with finding out who Gertrude was and what had happened to her. When Bethel visited the house, he used a spirit box to try and communicate with Gertrude. At first, there was nothing but static. To this day, Helen still believes that the house is haunted by Gertrude's spirit. Sometimes forgetting an entire town can be the result of a conspiracy. Take, for example, the case of Silent Town. Was a small town located in Pennsylvania. In the early 1960s, the US government began experimenting with a new form of torture that would become known as Operation Midnight Climax. The people of Silent Town knew what was going on. They saw the men being dragged into the brothel and they heard their screams of pain. If you enjoyed this video and want to hear more stories about forgotten towns, stay tuned for more content. We've got plenty more where that came from.